Welcome back. Well, Finance Minister Tito Mboweni is expected to present the supplementary budget at 3 p.m. this afternoon. COVID-19 and the national lockdown ravaged the markets and the country's economy. I want to get a perspective now and their expectations. South African Federation of Trade Unions General Secretary Zwelinzima Vavi now joins us live. Mr. Vavi, thank you very much indeed for your time.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for inviting us to participate in your program.
It's a great pleasure to have you. I want to talk about jobs. We saw the numbers that came out yesterday, 30.1%. Some analysts say, although an increase in the unemployment rate has been recorded in the first quarter of this year, a more significant rise in unemployment is expected in the second quarter due to the impact of COVID-19 and the lockdown. With that in mind, Mr. Vavi, what's your expectations regarding this supplementary budget?
Well, we expect help, to be honest with you. We expect two main things. We expect that the government is going to impose an austerity program as if that have never happened before. Already we're reeling for a massive budget cuts in February, which have been running in response to the world economic crisis of 2008 for at least now some good 10, 11 years. We think that today is going to represent a serious beating, cutting in a significant way the expenditure directed to assist and to help poor get out of the deep, dark hole of poverty, unemployment, and inequalities.
Where do you expect the cuts?
Already, if you look at the cuts announced in February, we saw the government cutting a 161 billion rands from the public sector wages and their conditions of employment, something that have led to government to basically walk out of a signed agreement it has with the public sector unions. We saw government cutting the health budget by over 3.4 billion rands. We saw government cutting even the infrastructure budget, the rollout of water and other forms of infrastructure, and we saw a total assault on the poor and their standards of living. If we were disgusted by that, we don't know what we're going to be calling today, because today is going to go into a overdrive. That's our first expectations, as I was saying. The second expectation is that we expect that government is going to announce a zero-based budgeting. And we think that in the context of government's own stance at the macroeconomic policy level, that zero-based budgeting is going to be yet another statement against the poor. The bureaucrats, the director generals, are going to be asked to justify every cent of spending directed on the poor, including the frontline services, education, healthcare, policing, fighting crime, and basic infrastructure in the townships and the rural areas. All of those are going to face an increased spotlight by a government that sees nothing but to continue to please the rating agencies at the expense of the black working class.
Mr. Vavi, I just want to talk about the zero-based budgeting, and some of these terms might fly over our heads. So I want to break it down for myself as well as the viewers in order to understand what's at stake here. What's your understanding with regards to the zero-based budgeting and its effects?
In principle, there's absolutely nothing wrong with zero-based budgeting, because it should say you want to gun for a more efficient state that can justify every cent of its spending. That's the purpose. But the experience everywhere else, in particular when zero-based budgeting is now introduced in the context of austerity measures and budget cuts, we think that it is going to be used to justify the slashing of the expenditure on the poor. Let's take one example of the zero-based budgeting that was introduced in the United States without addressing the corruption. in South Africa already we are losing between 35 to 40% of our procurement expenditure to corruption. There is no statement we expect that will arise from today. There are no actions that we expect will be announced today to address that level of looting of the procurement expenditure. We've heard stories already about how bureaucrats are looting left, right, and center, even in the context of this greatest pandemic to visit South Africa in the recent years, the coronavirus. Now, in the United States, the effect of the zero budget expenditure amounted to a waste of managerial time and resources to try and justify every cent, and therefore a defocus away from the need to address the crisis of poverty, unemployment, and inequalities. The inappropriateness of the technique of many governmental services where it was difficult to define the levels of input. The gamemanship, the temptation wherein agencies make reductions unpalatable, e.g., that the Department of Interior hypothetically decided to absorb a budget reduction by closing the Washington Monument, and a nearsightedness of the zero budget concentration on the upcoming fiscal year at the expense of a longer range issues. That was the impact in the United States.
Right.
We wait to see what is going to happen to South Africa in the context where government already is on a austerity gone steroid.
Well, I understand in terms of we need to find a sound strategy in order to, work on this triple threat that you mentioned. But, I'm sure if I throw a question to our brothers and sisters who are watching now and say, what do you want? Jobs is the big thing. I was listening to political economists at the International Labour and Information Group, Dr. Dale McKinley, who was saying that, you have a situation here where you have the formal economy that is shedding jobs and an informal economy that is increasing jobs. And what that tells us is that we need a fundamental rethink in the way we are creating jobs in this country. You agree?
Absolutely. Except that I don't trust anything that is called fundamental coming from the ANC president and all of his alliance. Since the beginning of the crisis in 2008, they have been promising us a second phase of radical economic transformation that have meant more austerity programs, more neoliberalism, and more entrenchment of the capitalist mode of production and the removal of the state from the economy through privatization of everything in the economy. So we hope that the crisis at hand now, with 10.8 million people unemployed, with 39.7% of the population already unemployed, with 7 of the 9 provinces with unemployment rate of more than 40%, and with youth unemployment reaching proportions that are simply taking us closer and closer to the ticking time bomb. The call that SAFTU will make now is a total rethinking of all of our economic strategies. Firstly, we must admit that the capitalist mode of production in South Africa has simply failed dismally. Neoliberalism and austerity programs have failed. Worst of all, when that is accompanied by massive levels of looting, both in the private sector and in the public sector. The rethinking now demands that we look at how we're organizing our economy. We're arguing that we must reorganize the economy altogether to strengthen the role of the state and hopefully a more efficient and corrupt free state, because there's nothing that have discredited the role of the state by the looting at the hands of the politically connected elites.
And to follow your point, Mr. Vavi, we need to figure out how we bring in the youth into the economy. And there's also this large percentage of graduates who are without jobs. How do you think, very briefly, they can be absorbed into the system?
The first thing we think we should happen is not just a reorganization of the economy all together to put at the center the people's needs for jobs, to fight against poverty and inequalities. But more importantly, as the short term, we have, before the COVID crisis, called for the stimulus, the fiscal stimulus package of about 500 billion rands. Now, with the impact of the COVID, we can all see that stimulus of 500 billion is beginning to be a drop in an ocean, and it is making no impact at all in saving the jobs of gas workers, of Eskom, SAA, SA Express, Denel, you name them all. We need a more significant stimulus package, and we hope that a miracle will happen, that the Minister of Finance announces today a real new money combined with the reform of the monetary policies to move us away from this preoccupation with inflation targeting into targeting economic growth as well as employment generation, targeting the youth in particular.
Mr. Vavi, we've got to go, but thank you very much indeed for coming on and giving us your perspective. Be well.
Thank you very much.
All right, that was the South African Federation of Trade Unions General Secretary, Zwelinzima Vavi.